We will move to the next talk, which will be given from Philippines by Joshua Cedric Gundayao from University of the Philippines Diliman. Sorry for spelling. By the way, what's the time in Philippines? Is it 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock?
Almost 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Okay, so as you may see, the Christian philosophy is all over the world constantly. I will display the Joshua lecture now, which is titled The Triplicia Via, Revisiting Saint Bonaventure's Rectification of the Will in the Modern World.
Good day, everyone. Allow me to present to you my paper, The Triplicia Via, Revisiting Saint Bonaventure's Rectification of the Will in the Modern World. Who is the human person? Is he solely a human being who possesses cogito as what some modern philosophers would postulate? Is he an imago Dei, a being who possesses both body and soul that exhibit its creator? Is he a unicity of experiences that continuously unfold itself over time to his fellow being? World wars, political uprising, various types of pandemic, and natural calamities are some of the things that shape and continuously affects the world. These agents of change do not only alter the world per se, but also affects all that reside in it, especially the human person. With all these catalysts that result to alteration and continuously shapes the world, can we say that man, unlike the world, is unchanging? On the top of all these conditions, in the era of modernity, is the human person still the same man as we conceive him to be? Is Christian philosophy, particularly Christian anthropology, still relevant in our pursuit of understanding the human person? This paper aims to argue that Christian anthropology is still relevant in contemporary era. The medieval notion of anthropology, especially among Christian thinkers, is always twofold: man in the state of grace and man after the fall. This paper springs from the reality that despite man's fallen nature, he has still inherent desire to perfect himself through the attainment of the summum bonum. The understanding of the human nature of the human person is rooted to the very identity of man, his intrinsic nature, the imago et similitudo Dei. This understanding in anthropology is continuously affirmed and remain unchanged in the history of Christian philosophy from medieval era down to contemporary Christian thinkers. This truth cannot simply be dismissed since this is what set the human person apart from the rest of creation. As an imago et similitudo Dei, the human person is a creature who, bestowed by God's grace, can easily pursue God as the telos of all its action. In the prelapsarian condition, God made man a rational creature with body and soul, the body being the corporeal substance while the soul constitutes the spiritual substance. As a creature that possesses body and soul, the human person is the highest of all corporeal being, but lowest among the spiritual beings, due to the limitation of man as created by matter. Despite of the place of man amongst spiritual being, he is so close to God since he is an image of him. It is due to the fact that the soul itself is an image of God and a similitude so present to itself and having God so present to it that it actually grasps God and potentially has the capacity for God and the ability to participate in God. Moreover, in the state of grace, man is made upright by God. The physical uprightness of the body, courage, was to bespeak the rectitude of mind. The body is united with the soul as its perfective principle, so that it might move toward and attain the blessedness for which it was made. In the state of grace, man has control over his appetite. The lower faculty of the soul is subjugated by the higher faculties, particularly by reason. The human person as rational creature was imperfect despite of being an imago et similitudo Dei, since he is created out of nothing. As creatio ex nihilo, man can fail to act out this intrinsic relationship with God. It instead can act for itself rather than for God. Man can choose to do whatever he wants, contrary to what the reason suggests. Despite of possessing the voluntas, this capacity of man is still fallible, that is capable of falling to adhere to the summum bonum. In fact, in the biblical narratives of the fall, the first human fell into sin by the wrong use of voluntas. Man failed to act for God and ended up acting for itself by choosing to eat the forbidden fruit. As an effect of the fall, the human person is faced with another identity, his fallen nature. The illustrious Tragilite philosopher postulated in the ancient times that all men by nature desires to know. This desire for knowledge is not a sheer craving in learning new things, but is yearning to be perfect, to be perfected. The human person desires knowledge because something is lacking within him and needs to be filled in order to be, first being to be fully actualized and perfected. Since the human person is capable of actualizing and perfecting itself, this assertion now begs to address the question, can the human person always perfect by what it desires? If not, what can perfect the human person in the first place? And what is the appetite? And is the appetite related to one's pursuit of perfection? The human person is moved by the appetite towards the thing that it perceives to be something which can perfect it. All goods are desirable. That is why it is called appetitus, since it is desirable to the senses and to the will. In Bonaventure's work Itinerarium Mentis in Deum, he depicts man as a journeyer who is in quest of perfecting himself. He illustrates on that work that it is God who is the end of the journey. It is because for him, God is the source and the summit of all beings. Hence, perfection is perfectly attributable to him, since he is perfection himself. The name good is proper and the principal name of God, for it connotes the perfection of God. This assertion could be understood profoundly on the discussion of God as the primum principium. Nonetheless, since there is nothing existing which is not God, who is the first cause, therefore goodness could validly predicated to him. In line with this, since everything can exist has God as its primum principium, the existence of goodness could generally attributable to him. Hence, if God is the source of all things, it properly follows that he too is the origin of all goodness. Perfection is goodness. The reason why we desire to be perfected is because it is good. If good is desired because it yields perfection and ultimate happiness, and if God is the most perfect and source of perfection of all beings, it is accurate to say that God is the summum bonum. Faced with this fallen nature, the human person has now the difficulty of exercising faculties which he formerly exercised to the full. Turning away from the true light to the changeable good, the first human was bent over through a personal fault, and the entire human race became bent over by original sin, which infected human person in two ways. It infects mind with ignorance and the flesh with concupiscence. As a result of peccatum, man's original stature of being upright became bent over because it is infected by the corruptive influence of malum. In addition, the malum is the withdrawal from the first principle. It is withdrawal to the source of perfection that man desires, which in return causes the corruption and disorder within the human person. As an illustration, if man chooses the mutable good apart and above the summum bonum, he is withdrawing himself from God since the summum bonum is no other than God. The corruption of the order of things leads to the choice of the mutable good independent of the summum bonum. On one hand, due to ignorancia, the human person can no longer directly contemplate God and see the highest good in contrast to the lower good. On the other hand, caused by concupiscence, the lower powers can no longer completely govern by the higher powers. Today, all things are fashioned in a way that the senses could easily attracted to it. In the world of shimmer and pleasure, it is very difficult to decipher which good is higher than the other. In addition to the fact that discerning the highest good is naturally arduous as a consequence of the fallen nature. Confronted with the various types of good, the human person all the more suffers the difficulty of seeing the summum bonum that is sometimes outshined by the lower goods due to their appeal to instant happiness and pleasure. For example, it is easy for contemporary man to support abortion and fornication. It is because committing abortion and getting away with the responsibilities of being a parent is more appealing and seem comfortable than pursuing being a mother where your current situation seems to suggest that performing such responsibility would be difficult. Moreover, many people of today commits fornication because of their desire to quench the sexual urge that is present within themselves. Fornication today becomes an avenue of one's exercise of sexuality that brings fulfillment and satisfaction to the doer of the act. Situations involving abortion, fornication, and the likes are common today because the desire to be happy and pleasured subjugates the desire to be perfected. It is as if perfection is different from happiness and pleasure. However, in reality, happiness and pleasure were only proper effects of perfection. In such case, the effect should not be pursued from perfection per se, because this might lead to pseudo-happiness and pleasure. In cases where the lower goods are pursued and not the summum bonum, it is only the temporary cravings that is being satisfied and not the very being of the human person. For instance, when the human person desires for food, it is only the sense of taste and appetite which is being satiated, not his substance, which is the rational soul. Unlike with the case of the summum bonum, whenever the human person desires the highest among all things, the effect is not only permanent, but also affects the very core of its being. When the summum bonum is pursued, it is not only the accidental desires of man that are being fulfilled, but the human person per se, since it renders intensification of his being. That is why in contemporary world, there is a great need to rectify the will towards the summum bonum so that the human person's desire, particularly his nature, would once again be intensified and go back to its original goal, which is perfection. Since voluntas is corrupted, it is in need of rectification. The voluntas which is corrupted focuses its attention towards the lesser good. Nonetheless, it must not be misconstrued that voluntas chooses malum for all desires are only about good. Voluntas does not desire malum for its sakes, rather the summum bonum in attainment of the lower good. In rectification of the will is once again put in conformity with the summum bonum. If voluntas is once again in conformity with the summum bonum, then voluntas is again made upright and recovered from the bent over due to the fall. For Saint Bonaventure, a person can only achieve the blessed state through reforming power of gratia, done over the process of purgation, illumination, and perfection or union. The soul is purified, illumined, and perfected through the reformation of image by means of the theological virtues, the enjoyment of spiritual senses, and the ecstasy of rapture. It is through this that the soul, through the aid of grace, is reformed. The hierarchizing activity of the Triplicia Via is an ongoing process through which the soul of the faithful person becomes as like possible to God, is led back to God, and comes to experience a greater measure of union with God. The goal of this hierarchical acts is to intensify the image of God in man by regaining man into the hierarchical order from which he departed due to the fall. The purgation consists in the expulsion of one's sins, illumination deals with the imitation of Christ, and perfection ascribed to the union with the heavenly spouse. Gratia, as a gift from God, is a voluntary gift from God out of His supreme goodness in wanting to redeem the entire mankind. Through grace, man is able to develop virtues and do meritorious acts, since through his sole efforts, he cannot advance in virtues and do good things by the reason of fallenness. The purgative way focuses on purgation of the soul from the evil deeds in order to direct his affection to the higher being. The illuminative way concentrates the imitation of Christ that takes away man, that places man directly to the affection of the spouse, which is Christ. The perfective way highlights the experience of the soul being enjoyed with the spouse. Through the said union with the spouse, with the soul is being perfected in relation to God. These hierarchical acts intend to perfect the soul by means of its reformation through the aid of grace, and these hierarchical acts aid man in fighting the effects of malum on the powers of the soul, more particularly ignorantia and concupiscence. As an effect of continuously changing world, the different types of good also changes right in front of man's appetite. For instance, in the past, man's desire the fastest and strongest horse that is available to aid him in traveling. But nowadays, because people would choose a BMW rather than a horse for a more comfortable travel, because people are already satisfied with beepers that would allow them to connect with their friends and relatives. But today, most people wanted cellular phones by majority that has the latest application, clear cameras, and good features. Same types of effect but presented as a different form of good. This does not mean to say that we should reject the things that this world offers as a result of innovation and advances in technology. The main point is that yes, the human person could enjoy these things, but he should not allow himself be overwhelmed by those to the extent of making it as the central of his life. After all, none of this can perfect man. Deep within his being, there is still the unquenchable thirst to be perfected by a good which is the very source of perfection and goodness. Surrounded by uncountable different goods that are all appealing to the senses, the human person needs to rectify his will to the good that is constant and unchanging. The authentic perfection lies on the pursuit of the summum bonum, which when obtained will never cease, in contrast to the lower good that the words offer, which were fleeting happiness and pleasure. The perfection that the summum bonum yields affect the entirety of man's being, not only some of its physical parts. There is a need for the authentic perfection which can only be attained through rectification of the will, so that man, the human person, will be intensified with its being. This intensification brought about by perfection allows the human to be more acquainted with himself, which would result to the realization of who he is, what he do, and how should he act and why he is.
Thank you, Joshua. That was Joshua Cedric Gundayao from University of the Philippines Diliman. So, do we have any questions to Joshua to the concept of Saint Bonaventure rectification? Anyone from the audience on site? If there are no questions here, we can move to the questions from the participants on WebEx. Are there any? YouTube? Does anyone have any questions to Joshua on Saint Bonaventure? I guess we have some speakers from Saint Bonaventure University on the parallel session, but they can't ask any questions. If there are no questions, I can see that Anna is with us. Anna, would you like to say something? Just please unmute yourself. And
okay, so Joshua, your paper was very clear. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. But because it was that clear, I have no questions. Well, you did ask me the question before, and I wanted to give you an answer. You asked me, I will read, because we can say anything about God, at least substantially. Can we say that in a certain sense, insofar as language is concerned, God is a nonsense because he is beyond the limitation of language? Just as I give you an example, because a child cannot understand Einstein theory, it doesn't mean that the theory itself is a nonsense. God revealed, he is not a deceiver. He reveals us his true attributions and his true characteristics. They can't speak in terms of those characteristics about him. It's not what they cannot speak about him at all. Yes, we do speak about him in limitation of our language. But it doesn't, yes, we do not know him in substance. But it doesn't mean that he is a nonsense, or what was revealed to us is a nonsense as well. But there was yet another question, I think very close to that. And question comes from somebody, I think from YouTube, I'm not sure. Does God have a gender? Is sex his attribute? If not, why call him or not her, or assuming that God is Father, Son, and the Spirit there? Actually, those two questions are very close. We speak about God within limits of our language. Our language is accustomed to our nature. Gender is our characteristic. It's a characteristic of our created world. And to have a gender is, to an extent, be limited to something. You can discuss to what exactly we are limited, yes? But in any case, it is to be within some limits. God is beyond any limits. God is beyond gender. I would dare to say that God is, please take a pause, now it's coming, God is transgender. He transgresses all our conceptions of gender. He is beyond it. But we still need to speak about him in some way. And this, in a way, is limited by our customs, by our customs of our language. And therefore, we need to apply to him some attributions, some names. So those names, unfortunately, are limited by our culture. And our culture, we all know what it is, usually attributes to a person of power such thing as being him, for instance, okay? But properly speaking, we shouldn't speak about him neither as about she or him, about her or him, because as I said, he's beyond all our conceptions of gender, and he's beyond of gender itself. So thank you very much, and thank you yet again for Joshua.
I see that Joshua asked another question on the chat. Anna, would you like to read it on loud and respond?
Okay. What I mean by nonsense, there is totally outside the understanding of man, at least epistemologically. Can we approach God epistemologically or not? You see, if you are a Cartesian kind of thinker, you may think that probably God could deceive us and give us false information. But as a Christian, or not only Christian, you can be Jew. You believe that God, as a creator, he is a source of truth because he is truth himself. So then God reveals to you through his own words, in his own Son, by his own activities, such as creation, for instance, his characteristic. Then he reveals through his powers and actions who he is. The information which they are given and is true. And through this information, he is accessible. But it's, again, you see human action as performing something good. Because of that, you said that man is good. But is good and who man is two different things. That doesn't mean what we have no whatsoever epistemological access to God. I hope it's suffice.
Okay, thank you for answering, and thank you for this discussion. Joshua also thanks you in the chat. Okay, Marcin, would you like to ask something?
Maybe I would like to add just 1 or 2 words on this subject, because it's about science, it's about language. We believe that we see things through language, but anytime you come to a place described to you, for instance, in a guide, you see things differently than you actually imagined them. Every sign can be looked at as a kind of arrow pointing to a direction. And we build an image based on what we see. But actually, when we arrive, we meet something else. With God, it's just much stronger. Much stronger. We are building a sign whose meaning is based on our direct experiences. And it is not a false sign because it's pointing to correct direction. But what we see will exceed enormously what we find here.